Okay, so it looks like we have all the panel members here. We'll begin the meeting. So I just wanted to say hello to everyone and welcome to today's virtual design review panel meeting. I'm Victoria Cox, the DRP coordinator and host of this meeting. However, panel member Colin Berman will be the chair today. Just a couple of quick notes. So in addition to the panel members present, we have the applicant team, city staff, members of the public, and the media observing this meeting. This session is being recorded and will be uploaded to the DRP webpage. Just a reminder to please keep your microphones muted if you are not speaking. Okay, Colin, I'll hand it over to you.
Thank you, Victoria. So Victoria, can you please confirm that this session is being recorded?
It is, yes.
Great. Good afternoon and welcome everyone to our virtual design review panel. We have the following panel members today: James, Jackie, Tim, Yassine, Robert, and myself, Colin. Victoria, are there any changes to the agenda today?
No.
Are there any declarations of interest?
No.
Great. So our second item today at the virtual design review panel is a mixed-use development located at Barton and Wellington. The lead planner on the file is Mark Keller. Good afternoon, Mark. We're ready for your presentation. Please keep the presentation under 10 minutes.
Thanks, Colin. Again, my name is Mark Keller. I'm a planner on the urban team in carriage of this file. It's mixed-use development at Barton and Wellington in Hamilton. So the proposal is for a 7-story mixed-use building with 79 dwelling units and commercial uses on the ground and second floor, along with 97 parking spaces. It is an official plan amendment and rezoning application, and it's located in our West Harbor Setting Sail secondary plan area. This is an aerial view of the site. You can see it's at the southwest corner of Barton and Wellington. Just to the northeast is Hamilton General Hospital. And then there's a surface parking area. There's a Tim Hortons restaurant to the west. And then along Wellington is a mix of single detached and semi-detached dwellings. This is a view from the site from Wellington Street. It's currently vacant. Yeah, you can see it's not much there right now. It's adjacent to the parking area, and here's a view from Barton Street. This is the existing development directly to the south on Wellington, semi-detached and detached dwellings. Here's existing development to the west, the Tim Hortons and the large surface parking area. And then to the north, there's an auto repair shop, and then behind the Children's Hospital. And here's a view of the Hamilton General, just to the northwest across the intersection of Barton and Wellington. And then to the east, there's another vacant lot, and then the kind of detached, semi-detached dwellings further along Wellington. Here's a view of the site, so you can see the parking's in behind and on the side. There's also some parking beneath the building. And the highest portion is right at the corner of the 7 stories, and then there's it transitions down to lower building heights along Wellington and Barton towards the west and south. So it'd be 3 stories. You can see here on the elevations. And then the entrance to the parking is off Barton. Oh, well, there's one entrance off Barton and one off Wellington. So for a policy framework, I mentioned it's in setting sail. It's within the Ferguson-Wellington corridor, which is one of the areas of major change in the secondary plan. So it's right on where the yellow star is, right on the very east portion of the secondary plan. And in terms of land use designations, it's split designated. So the portion at the corner of Barton and Wellington is designated local commercial, and then it's low density residential along Wellington further to the south. But they are proposing through their official plan amendment to redesignate it to a mixed use designation. So high-level policy themes, the Ferguson-Wellington corridor, as I mentioned, is an area of major change. And the policies really promote the remediation of the area. It was traditionally more industrial, so it encourages the remediation of contaminated land and conversion to residential, institutional, and commercial uses. And it also directs more of a pedestrian-oriented Barton Street, so new development to be built close to the street with no parking between the building and the street. In terms of the existing local commercial designation, this designation permits retail, restaurant, banks, professional offices, and then it allows office and residential above the ground floor and encourages that as well. And the maximum building height existing for that portion is 4 stories. And then it similarly encourages setbacks that are either similar to what's adjacent and up to the street, and to provide main entrances facing the street with parking behind. And then the low density residential further to the south. So these are really, low density character areas. So single detached and semi-detached and street townhouses are permitted for these areas with lot dimensions and setbacks, trying to be consistent with the existing low density character. And then the proposed designation being mixed use. This is a designation that permits apartment buildings and with ground floor street related commercial. Also promotes buildings built at or close to the property line, and requires private amenity space in the form of balconies, terraces, and also encourages common amenity space to be consolidated to create more usable spaces. And then it requires that new development minimize shadow and wind impacts on the pedestrian realm and respect light, views, and privacy of adjacent buildings. This designation refers to a separate schedule for building heights, so there's no building height requirement applicable to the entire designation. And then urban design policies from the secondary plan. So it encourages or promotes an interesting pedestrian environment, requires that development respect scale, design, massing, setbacks, and height of neighboring buildings, requires main entrances and windows on the street, facing the street, along with barrier-free access to commercial uses, and then requires that new development minimize impact on neighboring buildings by providing appropriate transition, and requires parking to be at the rear and side again of the building. In terms of zoning, it's again split zone. So to the south, the southernmost 2 lots along Wellington are currently zone D, which is a low density residential zone. And then an H zone for 261, 263, and the property at the corner of Barton Street. It's a commercial zone, and then the JJ zone is a light industrial zone. So these zones are not really reflective of what's being proposed. Multiple dwellings not permitted in these zones. There are no permitted commercial uses in the D district, so they have applied to rezone the property to a mixed-use, medium-density, pedestrian-focused zone, which is in our new City of Hamilton bylaw 5200. So 3 questions, hoping to have the panel address. Firstly, what is the relationship of the proposal to the existing neighborhood character? Does it maintain and where possible enhance and build upon desirable established patterns, built form, and landscapes? Second, does the proposal include the provision of amenity space, and what is the relationship to existing patterns of private and public amenity space? And finally, does the proposal provide connections and access to all buildings and places for all users, regardless of age and physical ability? That's all I have. If you have any questions for me now or later in the meeting, happy to answer.
Okay, thank you, Mark. We're now ready for the applicant to present their proposal. Please keep the presentation under 10 minutes. And if you could also please introduce yourself, it would be appreciated. Thank you. I believe you can also share your screen.
Yes, thank you. Good afternoon, members of the panel, staff, and the public. My name is Matt Johnston, a registered professional planner. Sorry, I'm just getting a notice that you can't connect your webcam. I'm not sure if you can see me or not.
We can't see you, that's okay, but as long as we can see your presentation, we're good.
Okay. Apologies for that. I have used WebEx before with no issues with the camera, so apologies there.
No problem. Now we can see the presentation, so we're all good to go.
Great. Okay. Thank you again. It's Matt Johnston at Urban Solutions here in Hamilton, and I'm joined by Ashraf Azim, who's been the lead on this file with McCallum Sather. Thanks to Mark for a good overview of the proposal and the applicable framework. I really won't spend much time on these first few slides to avoid the duplication. Mark gave a good context of the area. Another aerial showing that same context at a bit of a broader scale. Certainly you can see with the surface parking, the nature of the area, we certainly have an opportunity here to better implement the policy framework. What I thought I would do is take a brief moment just to talk a little bit of the history in terms of how we got to where we are today. And one important aspect of this has included the acquisition of alleys that existed in the area. They were acquired in two phases, illustrated here on this slide. Again, we've got a quick overview of the development. Again, 79 units over 7 stories. The 7-story tower focused at the intersection, tapering down to 3-story podiums with parking in the rear and below grade. We do have a couple of renderings that I'll allow Ashraf to speak to in more detail. Very quick summary where we started this back in 2018. The formal applications were submitted in December of 2019. And as part of a complete application, the following studies were required: an urban design brief and shadow analysis, functional servicing report, servicing and grading plan, phase 1 and 2 environmental site assessment, a noise study, transportation impact study and transportation demand management options report, and the tree preservation and landscape plan. From a traffic perspective, we engaged Nextrans. As Mark noted, we do utilize an access onto both Barton and Wellington. And there's capacity with the conclusions of the report confirm there's capacity within the network without any adverse impacts from a traffic perspective. Noise was a bit of an interesting topic for this particular proposal. For those that may not know, the Hamilton General Hospital is a regional trauma center, so we do have somewhat frequent helicopter traffic that we had to have regard for. The report does conclude that we are able to accommodate the use as proposed with some appropriate warning clauses and what's called a Class 4 classification when it comes to noise. That's something that will play out through the balance of the process. Not entirely unique to this area of town. The city has done a number of other Class 4 designations in the area, and we would employ the same strategy here. From a public engagement perspective, Urban Solutions does host what we call microsites, and we do have one active for this location. It's being well utilized. We'll of course present more analytics on that when we move towards planning committee. Most recently, we met with the Barton BIA on July 23rd. The general theme from that group was that they welcomed the proposal. They thought that it was about time that something along this scale came aboard. We've provided a summary of that meeting to the BIA and to staff. They were particularly encouraged by the range of uses that are permitted on the ground floor and second floor commercial space. And then, of course, we're at design review panel now, and hopefully when we move on to this, we will start thinking about how we forecast towards planning committee. The majority of the comments from departments and agencies have been received. We have assembled a response to those materials, but we haven't submitted yet. What we wanted to do before we do our second follow-up submission was obtain the feedback from the design review panel. So a response to the comments received is forthcoming, and again, we'll incorporate the feedback we get here today. And then finally, I'll now transition over to Ashraf, who can tell me when to hit the next slide, and he'll provide us with a good overview of what informed the design to date. So Ashraf, over to you.
Okay, thanks, Matt. Good afternoon, everybody. So not to duplicate what has been said around the context, I'll jump to the conclusion. So a review of the site context supported the proposed design of a mid-rise development sitting above a pedestrian-oriented commercial spaces and parking structure at the backside that responds to the challenges and opportunities to make this location a desirable destination. As you can see, that development will fill the present gap at the corner of Barton Wellington intersection, which is the gateway to the Wellington street and the residential community to the south. If we move to the next slide, or the one after, again, one more slide, yeah. So as you see from that slide, the proposed mass transitions into the surrounding area, especially up to the south and to the west, keeping the bulk height away from the low-rise neighborhood to the south and west. The tower has a greater setback from the south and from the west sides, and it is sort of positioned closer to the northeast corner of the property, which gives it a sort of street existence. The design defines the mass as a base, middle, and top component. That definition has been achieved by articulation, by setbacks and change in material. The setbacks help with the change in materials, the demarcation of the different materials. As you can see here, the first two floors, which are the commercial component and the retail component at the ground floor and the commercial. On top of that, they create a clear urban edge, which animates the street facade, having these the retail and the commercial uses to that facade. The upper stories, which are the residential, they provide a dynamic configuration of balconies, keeping the overall massing clear, efficient, and functional. Speaking about the materiality, the design proposes the usage of materials like brown brick for the podium, which reflects and reference the residential character of the neighborhood. The upper floors, the design proposes metal panels for the middle and top parts of the building, which gives a clean and maintainable surface and it does not compete with the podium. If we move to the next slide. So our sun shadow study showed that while that development shadows some sidewalks and some commercial buildings to the north side, no private or outdoor amenities or public spaces like plazas or parks will be negatively impacted. So the development has a minimal impact even on the sidewalks. If we move to the next slide, I'll try to move faster. These are different views from the different angles where the development could be seen from Wellington and from Barton street sites. Next slide, please. So that slide shows the proposed palette of material. As I said, we're proposing the use of brick on the podium, first and second levels, and a mix of white gray metal panels to the upper parts of the building. Next slide. So that shows the site plan, the proposed site plan, and the ground floor, the entrances from the south, and the exit to the Barton Street from the north. Next slide. And these are the proposed elevations of the development, showing the tower, the bulk height, and the podium, and the transition from the higher components to the mid to the low part of the project. Thank you.
Thank you very much for your presentation. At this time, if you could just leave the presentation up here, because we tend to ask you to. Thank you. So an opportunity for each panel member to seek clarification on any points that may require further explanation. Please hold your comments for the panel discussion portion. Questions only, please. So we'll start with Robert.
And thank you for the presentations. Quick question for the city. With respect to height, I know some of the zoning is now outdated, and this is an area where a lot of change is expected. Is there a target height or other buildings in the area that have been approved at higher heights? That's one. And then a related question. We know there's a helicopter approach to the hospital. In addition to the noise that established a height, sort of maximum height.
I'm not aware of anything related to the helicopter height. I didn't receive any comments back related to that. In terms of the policy framework for height, as you mentioned, the zones are a bit. Well, I guess we would refer to the secondary plan. So the existing, what the secondary plan height is for the corner would be 4 stories. So that's kind of the baseline. But then there's policies about, providing for transition, limiting impacts. But yeah, I guess the existing would be 4 stories at the corner. And then, as I mentioned, to the south on Wellington the lowest 2 properties permit only singles and semis and townhouse, so that'd be more at 2 to 3 stories. In terms of other developments directly on Barton, I can't think of too many. When I was walking the area, yeah, it's like I said, it's kind of an area in transition, and that's reflected in the secondary plan. So yeah, hopefully that answers your question.
Yeah, okay, thank you. Those are all my questions.
Thank you. Next is Jackie.
Yeah, I'm just understanding that the outdoor amenity space hasn't been included due to the noise. Is that not something that could be included in the warning clause to allow the amenity space to be provided?
So was that directed to staff or to myself?
Whomever wants to answer it from the components is welcome to.
So in terms of noise and outdoor amenity space, there's sort of a key distinction when it comes to noise, where what they call outdoor living areas, the defined term from the ministry, where outdoor spaces are more than 4 meters, they must be mitigated. So that larger formal outdoor living area as defined is not being provided. But there are balcony locations in some, but not all units. And those balconies don't get classified as formal outdoor living areas.
Okay, so if the outdoor amenity was provided greater than 4 meters, you would simply need to mitigate the space.
That's right. In my experience, I'm getting a little far beyond my expertise, but I don't believe that warning clauses are appropriate or are a tool available to mitigate. I think you actually have to bring the noise levels down to a certain point in order to make them outdoor living areas. So that's sort of the challenge that we ran into here, is that the warning clause doesn't cut it, and the hospital noise is just too great to be mitigated in such close proximity.
Okay, thank you. That's my only question.
Okay, thank you, Jackie. Next to Tim.
Thanks, Colin. I just wanted to get clarification, Matt. I think you mentioned that, in fact, there's going to be 2 stories of commercial space. So is that the case? The commercial spaces we're seeing on the image here will, in fact, be 2 stories?
That's correct. And zoning has been geared to be rather flexible. The thought is at grade, you'll probably get more personal service, local commercial uses, whereas the second story may build off some of the synergies with the hospital, where you may see a bit more of a medical feel.
Okay, I think that answers my question. So you're maybe not certain yet, but you're anticipating some retail uses, I suppose, you know, takeaway restaurants, maybe a drugstore or something, pharmacy, and then offices above that.
Right.
Okay. Do you know yet whether you'll be able to get left turns in and out from the access on Barton?
Bear with me quickly.
If you're not sure, that's okay. I you know, it'll come back to a comment that, you know, I could have asked the question another way, is why you need 2 accesses to this site, which we'll get into the comments in it. Presumably it's because Wellington's a one-way street, so you kind of want more flexibility, but that's why I'm asking that question.
Okay. What I could do is, while questions are coming, I do have the traffic report. I'll just double check to see what, if any, mitigation measures are required.
Okay, thank you. That's all my questions.
Thank you, Tim. Next to Yassine.
Yeah, normally, I think a flight path does dictate heights around it. So I guess going back to Robert's comment, I think you should check on that. That might be a something that that might have an impact on your height. But I guess what it's leading is why. Could you just comment? Maybe it's a question for Ashraf. Why you decided to position the height of the tower where you have, because it in fact creates shadow for quite a long portion of the day onto the intersection. So I'm just wondering, did you try other options?
Well, yes, we've tried other options. One of the reasons to bring it closer to the corner is to set it back as far as possible from the 1 and 2 story neighborhood to the south and east, and to give it presence on the intersection, Barton Wellington intersection, which is on the opposite side of the General Hospital. And we've tried other options as well, keeping it to the east, keeping it to the south, but we believe that what we are proposing here provides a smoother transition to the neighborhood.
So you do understand it contradicts your shadow diagrams, right? That it's actually after 10 o'clock, all the diagrams are showing that the intersection is in shadow, if I'm not mistaken. So that's why I'm asking why if you because you could the most respectful thing could be to position it, let's say, to the west. So I'm just trying to understand the design decision to locate the massing where you have, because you do have kind of a captive audience in the sense that you can enter the residential anywhere on like Barton or it doesn't have to be directly on the corner, right? So.
Well, yeah, it doesn't have to, but we were trying to position it in a way that respects the neighborhood. And I think even if it is moved to the west, there will still be some shadow on the intersection.
Okay. Can I ask what is the size of the floor plate of the tower?
Okay.
How many? What's a typical square meterage on the floor plate?
Okay, give me a second. I'm trying to dig that out.
Can I maybe ask okay, all right, go ahead.
Well, that piece of information is not ready in front of me. I can dig for it. I have the overall GFA and the other numbers.
So you can give me just the area of the overall area you have of the commercial use versus the residential use. Ideally, it would be good to know what the typical floor plate size is. Another question, I guess, probably to the city is, could you just clarify whether there have been any sort of urban design? I guess I'm trying to understand what the future of this, the surrounding areas is going to be. There's, why you talked about the laneway early on, but I see the laneway here is closed, and maybe I didn't completely understand your comment at the beginning. Is that laneway going to be reinstated, or where this car parking is at the back? And I mean, I can see that there's quite a grade change there. So is there something there that's going to be happening in the future?
I believe that they've closed the laneway, and Matt can correct me if I'm wrong, but I believe they've obtained the. Is that correct, Matt?
Yes, so the approvals for the lane closure are in place. We do show pedestrian connections that would allow for some of that connectivity to remain.
When you say approvals for the lane closure to remain, meaning that because where that parking is located now, there can never be a lane there. Is that what you're saying?
Yes, and sorry, not to
Cathcart Street, right? That can't go through. That's what I'm referring. Sorry, maybe you're thinking it's the laneway at the back of the residential. I'm actually talking about Cathcart Street. So just to be clear, is there any reason why? Like, is there? I see quite a bit of a grade change there. Is there something else preventing that street? Like, has that ever been a proposal from an urban design standpoint to carry that street through?
No, it hasn't.
No. Okay. Ashraf,
I can answer to the first part of your question. That there was like a pedestrian connection identified in the secondary plan, on the secondary plan mapping.
Okay.
There is a policy though for the Ferguson-Wellington corridor, just identifying that, you know, the intention for this area is really to regenerate. So where there's opportunities to consolidate lots for appropriate development, it's more conceptual than. But it is something that was considered. Oh. Hello? Maybe I'll come back to it. I'm just trying to find the policy right now.
Sorry, I didn't catch all of it. I only caught bits of it. So I'll, yeah. Okay. So Ashraf, just another question. When you were developing different options, did you kind of predict or do any sketches of a potential reconfiguration of the streets, like in terms of how, if the street pattern was different, how would you redo the massing? Because in some ways, the option you've offered is kind of the most conservative option, right? So I'm just wondering, did you study a potential reconfiguration of the streets, or how this area might evolve in the future, and how your building will guide that potentially?
Okay, can you please clarify what you meant by reconfiguration of the streets?
Yeah, so usually I think when architects evolve through a design process, no matter what the context is, I think you do explore potential future developments and how things might change in the area. And so, for instance, I can clearly see that Robert Street could cut through in an east-west. That could change in the future because they are, that could, you know, that whole property, that's triangular site could change in the future. Potentially Cathcart Street could carry through. What would, you know, would that shift your massing in any way, or the way you position the tower, or what other options you explored? I guess what I'm struggling on is what the other options you had studied.
So, okay, speaking about the streets, having that site at the corner of two main streets, we didn't see that any of reconfiguration of any of the other streets might affect how that site is and how it works. Okay. Especially that we are positioning our entrance far to the south and away from the existing commercial to the west. The other options that we have looked at, we've looked at placing the tower in a different location to the west or to the south, or maybe having an L-shaped bar tower, and how that works and affects the development, the neighborhood, and the context in general.
Okay. Can I just ask, just quickly, I know I'm taking up a lot of time. Well, how many parking spaces do you have for the 79 units?
We have, okay, I have that number, 1 second. Okay. We have 97 parking spaces, plus the short and long-term bicycle parking.
And they're all at grade? Or is there anything
No.
below grade?
There is a basement, one level.
Oh, there is a
below.
basement. One
Yes.
level of basement. Okay.
Yes.
All right. So I'm trying to. Oh, so there's a ramp there in the middle? When I'm looking at.
Yeah, and if you see the plan to the right.
Yeah, I'm
now,
looking at page 7 of your 8-page PDF, where you have the roof plan and the floor plan, ground level plan. So I'm trying to understand, is it where that off on it exits on Wellington, right? That's where it is.
The ramp it's an internal ramp. So yeah, exactly. That's where the cursor is. That ramps down to the basement from inside the development.
Okay. Okay. And then last question, can you just so I have three still items. Can you, if you can just give me some quick considering that this is part of a healthcare precinct, could you please just talk about sustainability, accessibility, and then just a quick understanding of the materials that it looks like there are two types of masonry materials, but if you could also just talk about accessibility and sustainability intentions.
So
Because one of the city comments, the questions to the panel is about physical disabilities and how does the building accommodate that?
So as for the accessibility, as the design evolves, it would be a fully accessible development, barrier-free paths from the entrance to the commercial, to the retail, commercial, and residential units on top. We will consider the percentage required by the code for the barrier-free units.
Mm-hmm. Okay. And any environmental or green design initiatives that you're discussing at the moment? Any LEED certification options? Any sustainability initiatives you're going to be pursuing?
Yeah, I think that's one of the next items to be discussed with the team in the coming few steps.
Okay, and am I correct? It's made two types of masonry mainly. There's the glazing is looks like a window wall system. You have a masonry panel in front for the residential, and then primarily the brown masonry at the bottom, right?
Well, actually, it's a brown masonry at the bottom. The first two floors will have storefront glazing. From the third upwards, it would be a mix of two shades of metal panels.
Okay, okay. And just lastly, what stage are you actually at in your design process? At concept or schematic, or what? Where are you? What stage are you at?
We are at the concept stage. Mm-hmm. The next step, I guess, is to start the SPA for the project.
Okay, all right. Thank you.
Okay, thank you, Yassine. I have one question. On the site plan, there's a large existing locust tree on Barton. Are you showing that as one of the tree symbols on your plan, that existing tree, or is that proposed to be removed?
These trees here are really conceptual in nature. We do have tree preservation plan included with our application. It's been a little while since I looked at it, so I am pulling it out right now. While we take a closer look, I did have an opportunity to take a closer look at the traffic measures in response to the earlier question, and there is no requirement for a right-in, right-out stemming from the conclusions of NextTrans. And we're just unfolding the tree preservation plan now. It might be an idea where we could field a few more questions while we take a minute to look at this.
Sure, that's the end of the question. So We'll now oh, James, I forgot. Sorry. Go ahead.
Thank you, and thank you very much for the presentation. It's great to see some redevelopment activity down around the hospital precinct, something that's been long coming, and will hopefully add to the vibrancy of that neighborhood. As you know, Beasley is very active, and Beasley Neighborhood Association is very focused on increasing the residential vibrancy of that neighborhood. So, question. As it relates to the residential component of the building, I'm just curious, you're at the zone change stage. Have you done any kind of market studies to understand what the market target would be for these residential units? Are we talking about family units, or this is, you know, frontline workers, small units for people working at the hospital?
I have not been involved directly in any market analysis. Ashraf, I know we do have unit sizes. Perhaps your office was engaged in a little more direct discussion on target audience. Hand it over to you.
Well, no, actually, we were not involved in any of the market studies. I think that's something that the client will be running soon.
Okay. I mean, the follow-up question to that is, if these are going to be contemplated for family units in any way, it's going to be integral to design, not just the dwelling units, but the building and all cater to that. So, you know, is there any thought? Does the building at present contain any indoor amenity space?
Yes, there is an indoor amenity space on the second floor.
And what is it?
Sorry?
What form is the indoor amenity space?
It is not decided at the moment. We have allowed for a space there at the second floor for the indoor amenities. I think while the design evolves, we will define these spaces, whether it is gyms, party halls, gathering, lounge areas. That needs to be discussed with the team.
Can you describe for us what your design intent is as it relates to the at-grade streetscape conditions for both Barton Street and Wellington? It looks like you've either got a relatively generous, or is that a road widening? And I'm really curious to know, because you got to admit, and you know, Matt will know this well, you'll both know this well. I mean, this is an area of the city actually where there is a fairly significant existing pedestrian environment in place in large part because of the hospital. So what are you doing at grade to improve the conditions, because they're at present fairly terrible? It's a street face sidewalk. What are you doing on your property to expand on that and make it a more vibrant and enjoyable pedestrian environment?
Okay, so
I'll touch on a few things first, Ashraf. Questions relating to road widenings. What I can confirm is we did submit a right-of-way impact assessment, and what we're proposing to do, and we've had some good dialogue with staff. It'll be verified through this process, but essentially we're looking for an exemption from a road widening on Barton. We're proposing a 4.5 meter daylight triangle at the intersection, and then we're committing to a 3 meter widening on Wellington. When we look at our building envelope, we're set back 3.5 meters from the existing sidewalk. So we're not building right to the street edge on Barton. However, we are looking to do so over on the Wellington side, where we are giving up the 3 meter widening. That's got important considerations for us below grade from a parking perspective, et cetera. So that's really what's happening in terms of process for the right of way. It was an interesting topic from the BIA, where actually one of their biggest concerns was we have an active streetscape and pedestrian friendly streetscape. And by introducing the commercial retail at grade, personal service range of uses, we think we'll get that. But that same theme was echoed by the BIA. And Ashraf, if you do have anything else to add about the interface at grade, I'll hand it over to you.
Thanks, Matt. I think, yeah, you covered it all. So by placing the retail commercial and the commercial at the street frontage, I think that animates that facade. animates the street facade as well. And while we are evolving the design, we will pay attention to the pedestrian experience, the human scale, selection of familiar materials like the brick that reference and relate to the neighborhood, and careful design and positioning of things like the lighting and the signage would definitely enhance the pedestrian experience.
Any opportunity for at-grade patios? Is there any room left after the widenings? I mean, I know that it's a bit premature. You don't know who your tenants are, but ideally, you're going to get a range of uses that might spill out onto the street and use part of that streetscape. Is there room for patios?
We do have the 3 meters on Barton, and on Wellington, there is room subject to encroachment agreements. So it is something that, as you know, James, the city does entertain encroachment agreements for seasonal patios. So that would have to be utilized on the Wellington frontage. And Barton, we have 3 meters.
Last question, and Matt, I know that this is a very technical issue, but you're exploring the establishing as a class 4, which typically means that you're not able to meet these requirements based on standard mitigation opportunities. So is it residential component? Feedback. If you could just, what element of the build do you use? I'm assuming it's the residential. Are there going to be operable windows? I think balconies. What constraints or design restrictions are resulting from the noise?
Okay, so yeah, the class 4 designation is new territory for me. I do know, I have witnessed the city employ that tool in other instances. I just haven't done it firsthand myself. So I'm just flipping quickly to the final recommendations from the noise report. So we've got warning clauses. We have the requirement for central air. We have requirements for building construction enhancements in terms of the materiality utilized. Now that's a very high level capture. I would need another minute to just really check on operable windows. But we do have requirements for enhanced window panes.
Okay, thanks for that, and I agree. I mean, it's a new and it's an opportunity, a fantastic opportunity to incorporate additional mitigation measures to improve design elements. So the question to the designer, I mean, the building has a bit of a feel of more of an institutional than residential building, and is that in part because there's a limitation on being able to design the residential tower component with balconies?
Sorry, I was on mute. Actually, the tower is designed with balconies. So the staggered pattern that you see there, it is a configuration of balconies that are dynamically positioned around the tower with some sort of screening pattern in front.
Okay, so they're essentially recessed then?
Yes.
Okay. Okay, thanks, Tim. That's all the questions I had.
Okay, thank you. So it's the question and answer session. And we'll move to panel advice. So based on the information provided by city staff and the applicant, each panel member will now provide feedback and recommendations. To the proponents, if you could please hold any questions you have until we are finished. I'll give you an opportunity to speak after. And we'll begin with panel advice with Robert. Yeah, Robert has a low bandwidth warning, so. Robert, could you try one more time to speak? And if you get the low bandwidth warning, I'm just going to skip over you and we'll come back. No. Okay, so Robert, we'll come back to you at the end. So we will begin then with Jackie. No. You're still chopping. It's still choppy.
Okay, so one of the questions was, does the development improve the landscape of the area? And I think that's one area where things can be improved. The site plan looks like a commercial institutional site plan, not a place where people are going to live. And I think work needs to be done to make sure there is outdoor space as an amenity, and whether that is working it into the warning clause or doing mitigation. I think it's part of what needs to happen on the site. People need to get outdoors. COVID has shown us how much better outdoors are than indoors in terms of getting together with people. And so I just encourage you to work further on that to improve the outdoor realm. Maybe the ground floor parking is in the underground. So you've got some grade related amenity space, or to use the rooftops better for that. Those are my comments.
Thank you, Jackie. Now to Tim.
Thanks, Colin. Yeah, thank you again for the presentation. I just want to start by zooming out a little bit, and this goes to some of Yasin's questions about how you're responding to the context. And this really isn't all on you. I think, ideally, between you, the applicant, and the city kind of do need to look at the larger block. And by that, I mean all the way over to Ferguson, just to kind of think through the structure for future development of this area. And I think even before I go there, I think we have to appreciate this is an area of the city that, from an urban design standpoint, needs some help, right? And there's going to be a lot of change, presumably, here over the coming decades. And it may take many decades for this place to evolve as a hospital precinct, given that the hospital or hospitals, control much of the land, and the changes here will maybe be dictated in large part to the extent those institutions develop and grow and redevelop. Nevertheless, I think there has to be a slightly finer grained framework of kind of streets and laneways and maybe some open spaces that provide a structure for future development. And apologies, Shannon, but I'm hoping the city is going to be updating setting sail fairly soon. And I think when they do that, that will certainly provide an opportunity to look at this block in a little more detail and make sure there are guidelines there that get you the right kind of structure. And this is an issue because you don't want to kind of go at this block piece by piece and have too many driveways and laneways that kind of don't connect up and little patches of open space that don't add up to something. So there is a need for a kind of a larger vision here. I'm not putting this all on the applicant here, but in particular with respect to access, I can understand the disappearance of the historic laneways. Nevertheless, the access you're going to provide off of Wellington should, in long term, continue on. Really, that should be ideally, even if it's private, be potentially a shared driveway to whatever development happens to the west, whenever it happens. That may be a little complicated, but I think those are the kind of structuring things that need to be thought of. And just while I'm speaking of access, as I hinted in my questions, there really, to my point, is no need for access off of Barton. This is an example. We don't want to see, 4 or 5 driveways off Barton to future development on the south side of Barton over time. In a perfect world, Cathcart gets extended. It probably won't happen, but some kind of public or private street will run through the middle of this block, and then everyone on either side can get access via laneways or some other means to the development sites. You're coming along kind of early in the overall transformation process, and so it's understandable that doesn't work for you. So the access off Wellington makes sense, but not off Barton. And I think and maybe complicates things in terms of internal circulation, but I think you have to work out those challenges. And by the way, it will give you more commercial space along Barton, which would be quite helpful and improve that pedestrian environment. With respect to, and by the way, I don't know disrespect, but I approach this as a concept. As you've said, you're in the concept stage, so I think there is more work to do on the building design. So really, these comments I'm giving, I think others are going to give, will be kind of in the spirit of the refinements that are yet to come, and to give you some guidance when you get to that stage. In terms of massing, I don't have any major concerns. I think it's, you've done the appropriate things in terms of providing a transition to the neighborhood, to the south. There's kind of this tower element. To my mind, those upper story, that's 7 stories, maybe it could be a little bit more, could extend across Barton. So this really is a mid-rise building. It's not a tall building. You're not really constrained to have a narrow floor plate. I mean, there might be an opportunity to go taller and slender, but I think probably what makes more sense is a little more density across the Barton frontage, keeping that transition you have to the south. Yes, it makes some good points about the shadowing of the intersection, that it's a slight concern, but my feeling is there's not a big setback that's really warranted here, or a step back that's warranted for that tower element. This intersection here, again, speaking of that context, it's an intersection that still needs to be defined as a place, and it may take a very long time for that to happen, but there are 3 corners there with lots of opportunity, including yours. And I think you're kind of doing the right thing with, I think, a little bit of a notch there, very small kind of gathering space. I'm not sure, I can't really comment at this concept stage whether you're offering enough yet. I would hope that we are going to get to see a more detailed design when you get to that site plan stage, and we can give you more specific comments. But that's, there's a real onus on you, for good or not, to really set the stage here. And that really begins with how you approach that intersection. You're doing some right things with the commercial space at grade. And I think in terms of the thoughts around materiality, makes some sense. But again, a mid-rise building, so it doesn't really need a podium. It does need a well-defined base, and perhaps a bit of a step back at the second story, but maybe not. Maybe it doesn't need a step back at all, or that could happen a little higher up. So I think a kind of different approach to massing is something you should think about. This is a bit more, I guess, about architecture, but that transition in terms of massing to the south is good. But architecturally, there needs to be a better transition to that residential character to the south. So I think in the design, there needs to be, again, it's just more kind of vertical, kind of breaking up of the building. It's not, I'm not saying to replicate a row house look, but right now, and this was mentioned by someone else already, the building looks very institutional. And again, it's just a concept, so there's details to come, but it does feel very institutional. And so in all its elements, I think it has to have a bit more residential character, but particularly that wing, that south wing. And I mean, back to the materials, it really does concern me that you're thinking of just 2 shades of metal paneling for the upper part of the building. To me, that really isn't quite acceptable. Again, it's going to make this building look institutional, probably not look very good in 5 or 10 years from now when the weathering takes a beating on those panels. So I really think that you need to be looking at a higher quality material, brick, masonry of some kind. Maybe not all the way up to the top of the building, but I think for a substantial part of the building, that would be much more respectful of what does exist in the area in terms of heritage and residential fabric. The amenity space, you've already got the message, I think, so far, and you'll hear it again. It is an issue. I think, appreciate the challenge around noise, and I don't know legally what the solutions are, but I think you've got space on the rooftop of your so-called podium, of the wings of the building. And I think at the very least, those should be really well-designed green roofs. So maybe even if they can't be made accessible, hopefully they could be, that they are providing some visual relief, which you don't really have in this area. The parking that's to the west of you is probably going to be there for a while. So there certainly needs to be more greening of the site. And I think along the Wellington frontage, that's going to be the opportunity. And it looks like that a lot of that will be maybe in the public right of way, but that streetscape is going to need a lot of consideration, because that's going to be kind of the front yard to this property. In the absence of a backyard, there's going to need to be thought about, seating in that area, some really thoughtful landscaping, because I think that will kind of be that could be the outdoor amenity space if you can't really accomplish it anywhere else. I'm going to stop there, I think, and let others chime in. So thank you again.
Great, thank you, Tim. I see that Robert's back. I'm sure you've thrown your modem against the wall and plugged it back in. So if you could, you can go ahead.
Thanks. Can you hear me now?
Yes, we can.
Okay, so I apologize. I missed some of Tim's comments, so I hope just tell me if I'm repeating anything. If it's possible, if you can call up, there was an overall area plan at the beginning of the presentation, just to get the context. Yeah, that one. That's great. So, and I did catch the beginning of Tim's comments, and I think this is a similar one, that in some ways it's a very difficult design exercise for the team. I feel for you in a way, because as described in the city presentation, right, it's an area that they're saying is due for major change, and then there's some sort of outdated policy to describe things about buildings closer to the street, parking in the rear, but no detailed kind of design clues for what should happen. So hopefully in the future that will be forthcoming. In an ideal world, the city would have had time to do an area study and urban design plan, and then you would be inserting your development into that urban design context. It's not a perfect world, and I can appreciate that the city has not had time to do that yet. So in a way, you're the pioneers here, and it's a difficult task. So again, as an urban designer, the first thing that you want to do is examine the context carefully, which you've done. But there's not a lot to grab onto here. You definitely do to the east across Wellington, and to the south you have the remnants. To the south, to the east, not remnants, but a whole neighborhood, that a strong neighborhood, as I understand it, who have some very strong ideas about what they would like to see, and how they would like developments in this area to relate to them. So that's probably your strongest piece of good urban context in the area. To the west, you've got a lot of surface parking lot, big blank slate as to what will happen next. Of course, you've got the hospital. Hospitals in cities are everywhere. Typically, are difficult buildings to relate to. But one of the things that that I would comment on, just based on the difficulty of the context, would be sort of latching on and responding really carefully to what is there. And so, if you could now switch the view to one of the rendering views that shows it from the corner, sort of the view from, yeah, so that one's good. So the bottom left, one of the things that that struck me about that view is the similarity of the response to Barton and to Wellington, whereas from my reading of what's there, and again it's a difficult context, they're actually quite different and really demanded, I think, a different response. With the Wellington context needing more of that kind of what you were describing, and I think what you've shown in some of your drawings, the kind of brick, lower scale building, base building that relates well to the residential scale street. I think Barton, again, because of what's going on and what's likely to come in the future, could be less of that, less of a stepping down, more urban, not necessarily the same kind of brick response as you're seeing on Wellington. So that's one sort of, I think, important thing to pay attention to when you're looking at the design of the base building. The second comment is when I saw the plan at the beginning without having seen the renderings, I had assumed that this was going to be quite a tall building scheme. The plan makes it look, or sort of sets it up to be, potentially a 20, 30 story point tower on top of the base building. So I was really surprised when I saw that in fact it's a mid-rise, and there are good reasons for it to be mid-rise in height. But the way that the kind of site plan and response is that it's kind of a truncated tower over a base building. And I'm wondering whether it wouldn't be more appropriate, and maybe you did try this and rejected it, but to have just a base building aligned in the east-west direction along Barton, and then where the old east-west alley that you acquired and have closed, that becomes almost the back of that building. Everything to the south of that is the kind of lower townhouse scale, maybe even with a greater setback than the rest of the building to respect the houses across the street. And then you just have this longer linear mid-rise building addressing Barton with its sort of narrow end toward the corner. Seems to me, given the difficulty of the context, that might in fact be a more contextually appropriate response to what's there. By contrast, maybe there is a tower scheme if in fact there is an appetite for a little more height, not a lot, likely due to the helicopter, and also potential shadowing on the neighborhood. There may in fact be a tower scheme, but I think as we're getting at with the questions, it looks like the existing tower may have too large a floor plate, and so if you decide to go with the tower scheme, greater step backs from the edge of the base building and a smaller floor plate, and perhaps making up the lost GFA through a couple of additional floors. Again, it was mentioned earlier, potentially if you want to go with the tower, maybe pushing the taller tower element further to the west to transition better to the neighborhood to the east. So those are sort of like some big points. I think there's, in my opinion, a major rethink of the overall massing of the development, and the scheme I described, the kind of mid-rise scheme I described, would be my preference. Just looking at my notes here, I agree that it's a tight site. You're using up most of it with building footprint. Really, really important, I think, as said before, to have amenity space, if possible, if the noise permits it, or just passive green roofs to look out on if the noise does not allow it. I think I already mentioned it, but along Wellington, particularly as further to the south, having the setbacks respect the kind of similar to what's going on the east side of the street, even with the potential street widening, I think would also help in terms of relating to the neighborhood context. Seeing if I've forgotten anything. I don't think I have. Those were my main points. Thank you.
Okay, thank you, Robert. And Yassine?
Thank you. Yeah, I would. I guess. I mean, I agree with everything that's been said so far. I consider this very much a preliminary concept. It does feel like there's a lack of clarity again for me in terms of the tower portion versus the podium. I'd say that that you have a third story there that's is becoming a little bit confused there. You have the 2-story podium, and then you have a third story that's another height that does the whole L shape, and so that's a little bit unclear to me. It's confusing, the whole sort of massing across the whole project. I did do a quick calculation based on your page 7 and your site plan, the dimensions shown there, I'd estimate your tower to be roughly, it looks maybe, it actually, the floor plate looks like what it should, maybe around 700 square meters. You can correct me if I'm wrong, but so having said that, the size of the floor plate is, it does still feel like a tower that should be, like Robert said, much taller. It's feeling very stout. And I personally feel that you have it in the wrong place. It is actually creating a lot of dark spots on the street that at very public points. And you've got a hospital that's from, it looks at least 30, 40, maybe older than that. There are a lot of solid surfaces along that edge, so it's not a very friendly environment. And if you are trying to create a lot of public frontage with your commercial, you want to give some sunlight and open, some sense of openness to the sky. So I personally feel like the location of your tower, I know you've made your arguments for it, but it's in the wrong place. And you have quite a bit of site at the back that you're using for parking. That's still, it feels undefined to me. Like it's basically an L-shaped wall that you've put to the corner, and then you've dropped a tower on it. So a mid-rise block. It's not quite a tower. So I feel like that whole, if it's going to be you need to decide whether it's a tower and a podium or a mid-rise building. I think they have a massing identity to them. And if it's a mid-rise tower that you're trying to conceptualize, you don't need that podium and that differentiation. I think there should be a sense that a mid-rise tower lands on the ground. And I think the massing would be quite different. So I find that a little bit confusing in terms of what you think your strategy is and why you're doing it. But albeit, like, the size of the floor plate is I don't, it's I thought it was much larger, but it doesn't seem to be. The other question, I guess, is having these 2 points of access seems to be chopping up the site a lot at the ground level. And again, on Barton, the fact that you have an entry point right in the middle of the block, it splits the block, and it's not very pedestrian friendly. So again, it's not I think every project in the city, no matter what it is, has urban design intentions and should have urban design intentions. So you have to have a presence on the street, and you have to have an intention of what you're trying to do. And having these different points of access, I think it's you're basically tearing up the street frontage. And so I thought we have reviewed another project that went through this kind of evolution where you had a corner site, and I think there's either at one end or the other. It's in the middle. It feels like you're basically breaking up the plan next. On the right-hand side shows how you're breaking up the site at the ground level. There's hardly any, you're not getting very good building area, and I think it's making the street frontage. It's compromising the street frontage quite a bit. Lastly, I guess the materiality. I think if it's a mid-rise building, then it could be much more cohesive and much more comprehensive as one form, right? That somehow the lower level rises to the upper levels, and it could be really interesting as a typology. There's lots of mid-rise examples in Toronto and in Hamilton that have gone through this evolution, but it like Robert said, it does feel like it's been it was a point tower intended for the site, and whatever constraints came through, it got chopped, and so we were left with this. So I question again the floor configuration and the location. The last comment I have is just the way if you are going to pursue this option, the upper story, the way the building terminates at the sky, it looks there isn't an intention about how how this upper portion of the building stops and you know, at what point. That's why I think it's creating this confusion that as if there's meant to be more stories coming to give it more presence, because that it looks like it's some kind of a screened area that you're just blocking off mechanical space, roof space, but it's trying to create a top to the building that is, you know, it's completely different from the language of the rest of the building. And so I feel like the building vocabulary has several different languages. You've got base, then you've got this middle piece, which is trying to be the third story. Then you've got the tower, then you've got the tower, you know, the mechanical screen at the top that's trying to create an architectural identity. There's a lot of different things. So I sense there's a, you know, you really should be exploring some variation in the options, or at least stripping out, consider removing this tower podium representation and make it a single building that somehow lands at the ground and creates a public zone. So if that doesn't make, if you have any questions on that, we can talk about it later. Thanks.
Thank you. And to James.
Thank you, Colin. I'm going to try not to repeat any of those excellent comments. I appreciate the challenge that is sort of the context of where you are in the process. You're in with planning applications for an OPA and a ZBA with site plan approval to come. Essentially, I mean, at this stage, it's almost like a massing study to tick boxes with regards to the zoning regulations that you're going to need to include as part of the redevelopment, whether it be the mixed use elements, setbacks, heights, and those issues. But, you know, I really do agree with the comments that the building, it's almost competing with itself in terms of what it's trying to be. It has the appearance of an institutional building, but that's simply because of where it's at of the design process. I think perhaps what the takeaway from the feedback that you're getting, again, understanding the context for this, is I think you need to begin prioritizing urban design principles that you're now going to follow in revisiting this building. And those design principles could in fact be written directly into the site-specific OPA that you're working on. There is no comprehensive set of design guidelines in place now, but you could essentially use this exercise through your OPA to elaborate on those design principles and create them as principles that you'll then follow in the subsequent site plan approval process. So, you know, we talked about issues in terms of ensuring that there's appropriate amenity space, whether it's indoor or exploring opportunities for outdoor. The Class 4 does provide for opportunities for that. I think the streetscape elements are critically important here because this is one of the first developments. I mean, think about the context for some of the other major hospitals in the city, whether it's up on Concession Street or even here on Upper James Street. I mean, there's the adjoining development is somewhat sensitive and complementary, and fundamentally does a really good job at trying to create a good and vibrant pedestrian streetscape. So any design considerations for how the base of this building is going to look needs to take in those very significant, you know, design inputs. You know, how does the building base relate to the streetscape? What things can you create, whether by design elements to the facade or what's happening interior to the building to create that dynamic public-private relationship and result in an active streetscape. When I look at the composition of the building, it looks as though there's sort of 3 at-grade commercial components with the building above. And I'm wondering, you know, how much commercial is going to be viable at the building. It's probably a great candidate for medical arts type uses, but as it relates to that Wellington Street component furthest to the south towards the escarpment, you know, I'm wondering if, again, taking into consideration what the surrounding context is, if you look across the street, it's you know, the built form is very vertical, you know, 4 to 6 meter wide residential uses, and that's sort of the typology, and that's the character of the neighborhood. So I'm wondering if, you know, should you look at that southerly portion which is everything to the south of the tower, you know, maybe look at that as creating some sort of more vertically defined residential feel. Maybe you go straight up, maybe you laminate, or you create an architectural element that resembles street townhouses along that frontage. So sorry, I'm just looking back at my notes. I mean, as it relates to parking, again, you know, I commend you because it appears that you're providing a 1-to-1 ratio on parking. But if you're also looking at doing medical arts, then there's certainly not going to be an adequate supply. So you might want to rethink how you distribute your parking supply for the project. With that, Colin, that'll conclude my comments. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. And then finally, my comments, I'm going to keep them brief. From a landscape perspective, there's not a lot here to dig into. As you're quite early, and there's been no landscape plan submitted. What I will say is some of the things that you can improve. The garbage pickup area on the street frontage is unacceptable. That should be happen internal to the site. Bike parking should be located adjacent to the building, not over the driveway area, so that people parking their bikes don't have to walk over busy driveways. As previously stated, I agree that 2 curb cuts here is not the right approach. You stated in the presentation that from a traffic perspective, it's supportive of 2 driveways, but from a pedestrian perspective, 2 driveways is certainly not preferable. And you should be pursuing 1 driveway entrance only. And we've seen many sites of this scale being able to achieve that. I agree with what Jackie said, and just to reinforce it, there should certainly be some outdoor amenity space here. We recognize that it does come with challenges. However, it's not acceptable to just throw your hands up and say we can't provide it. I think people who live here need and expect outdoor amenity space. You know, I'd wager that the people in the house immediately to the south don't avoid their backyards because of the helicopters flying overhead. I think hit that same mark. That concludes my comments. So we can now provide you with approximately 5 minutes if you have any, as an opportunity to ask any questions back to the panel, if you have any. If you don't, that's okay too.
Thank you, members of the panel. A lot of great comments in there, a lot for us to digest and consider. Like I said, it was well timed in that we have comments from the balance of the municipal departments and agencies, and we wanted this exercise to go through process before we respond. So we look forward to incorporating some of these ideas into our resubmission. Ashraf, I'm not sure if you have anything in particular to add, but that concludes my comments.
Well, no, I have nothing to add. I would like to thank the panel members for their comments.
Okay, thank you. So thank you to everyone in attendance. This meeting is adjourned.
Thank you.
Thank you, everyone.